Ian, welcome to Surventrix Connect. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. We're going to spend a bit of time together. I think I want to try and keep it fairly light-hearted. It's not death by PowerPoint, really, this. There's a lot to sort of talk about, I think, with the subject, as you can see there. I mean, I'm not here to tell you how to do things. I'm not here to sort of lead a discussion that's suggesting I am the master of heritage surveys. I think what we're looking to try and do today is to perhaps do a little bit of thought leadership, maybe sort of if we can get one or two people leaving the call with a few items, food for thought, moving forward, particularly around traditional buildings and heritage assets and what comes next, both in terms of, best training, which I'd like to talk a little bit about today, and also Surventrix. That would be mission accomplished for me. So obviously we take questions towards the end. I think the plan really for today is to sort of give a top level sort of discussion, which can form, follow-ups really. So just to introduce myself, as Ian's kindly introduced there, my name's Ian as well. So that's nice and easy to remember. I wear a couple of different hats for my sins, I guess. If I'd have put a younger photo of myself on there when I first started my career, I've been in surveying now, like yourselves, for getting close to 30 years now, which is quite a thing, really. When I look back, it's gone quick. But yeah, my hats, my sort of day-to-day things that I'm passionate about. So the day-to-day, really, I run an SME practice in the Midlands called Carpenter Surveyors. That's a residential practice that's a team of 9 surveyors and a team of 5 admin. And it's been established since 1988. So I'm just helping to nurture and continue to grow the success of that business with an amazing team of surveyors from all sorts of backgrounds, really. I'm also involved in Surventrix, which again, we'll chat a little bit about. Amongst other things, I'm involved in some assessments with the RCS and expert witness, and I don't know about the title trainer, but I'm trying to sort of instill some of that feedback, I guess, and share some of what I've learned, lessons over the years, but very much guided by Stephen Boniface on this. This is a project with Stephen. Unfortunately, can't make it today. Sends his apologies, but Stephen is the brains. I can't say I'm the beauty behind it, but he's certainly the brains in terms of the knowledge. So we're quite keen to share some of that with you. In terms of just me, very quickly, I'm not going to dwell on this one, but I just wanted to say, like you, I am a surveyor. I've been in the industry for a fair old while. My claim to fame, I guess, was I was one of the first intake for what was, I guess, Tech RICS, the Countrywide Surveyors trainee program way back in early 2000s. I loved my time at Countrywide, learnt an awful lot. I left Countrywide to join a practice of surveyors that were linked to an estate agency chain around the time of HIPS. We all know how that sort of turned out, and that's ironically now starting to come back to the table. So let's see where that brings the future. But I then sort of evolved into Carpenter Surveyors, which that was just next steps for me, wanting to do something a bit different, something of my own, just a natural evolution of that. And I guess during my time there, having used lots of different IT systems and report writing systems and trialed lots of different ways of doing things with efficiencies, I just got to the point where I just got frustrated thinking, well, there must be something that can be more in tune with what we need as a practice, particularly around heritage assets. I think as the more you start to do traditional building surveying, the more you start to look at things like listed buildings, you realise that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and it's all about customisation and branding and flexibility, and didn't really feel like that was out there for me. So that's why I got involved in Surventrix, to try and do something a bit different. Realised with that actually there's more to Surventrix than meets the eye. I heard a quote the other day which I thought was lovely, and it was all about Surventrix for them was a single source of truth. It's a single platform where everything begins, ends, and all the team work from it. That's great from a business operation point of view, but I think, and what we're adding into the industry with Surventrix, and there's some on this session I'm sure that use Surventrix that hopefully find it of benefit, feel that it adds value to not just them but their clients. But we wanted to do a bit more, and I think with training that comes, look, we've got an engine, we've got a system, let's really try and add some more value to that and show people how we can use the tools to your best advantage and how it can work for you and your business, really. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I think what I'd like to cover off today, this is not really a deep dive into heritage. I'd love to, but I think we'll all still be here till the new year if we start to talk in any level of detail about lime mortars and mixes and things like that. There's lots that I'd like to cover off. There's lots that we have in plan for best training. I'm not here to be in that full sales mode with you, but it give you a bit of an insight into what we're trying to do with that program, how it can interlink with Surventrix. And look, there are other systems out there, there's other ways out there. And if, like I said to you before, if you can take anything from today, It's to just think what if, or, what else can we do? And from an efficiency point of view, an equipment point of view, or, from a report writing perspective. So what I'd like to cover off, I think I'm not going to sort of read everything on these slides. I'm happy for these to be shared out to anyone that wants a copy. But I think there's a couple of key points really that when we talk about heritage surveys, what sort of sums those up really. I think, as with all things, when we're looking in the context of a traditional building, pre-war typically, that may or may not be listed, may or may not be in a conservation area, you have to think, well, how does that sit differently to, a post-war, a level 2 survey, something modern, a modern box, let's say. And I think it's just trying to get that balance between conservation, but also, you've got to think about compliance. I think with Surventrix developing workflows, we can bring in conservation ethics through report writing, through the framework of data capture and the tools that we use to do so. So we're hoping really to bring in a bit of modern efficiency, compliance and regulation to allow you to follow the process, but not in a way that compromises, the ethos of what conservation is. I think we talk about the Surveyor's Toolkit a little bit, how the Surventrix platform itself, and of course, full disclosure, there are others out there, obviously, can be optimally leveraged to, cover off heritage properties. I think all too often I hear people say, oh, it's another iPad report, or you can't do an iPad job on a heritage property. There's lots of different views on technology and hardware and mobile phones, iPads, drones, LiDAR. We'll cover a little bit of that off, but I'm not here to tell people what the best way of doing things is. I'm here to sort of share some of my experience, I guess, and really kind of give you an alternative view of what you could try. And I think those that use Surventrix may already have a flavour for this, but those that don't, I think there's some key lessons to take from this, and that's that, you talk about customization and standardization from that perspective. Surventrix can help with that, particularly around report writing and templates. So it wouldn't hurt to sort of touch on that a little bit. Look, every property requires an inspection requirement that is unique to that building, and heritage is no different. And I think it's how we use those systems, that software, those tools, and what we learn in the training that we can apply to those inspection processes. And, as I said, Surventrix can help do that too. And that falls within the data capture, from that point of view, there's lots of different ways we can do so. If you're in the camp of, I don't really want to use things like mobile phones, drones, cameras, camera poles, thermography, all of those sorts of tools. I just want to focus on looking at that building, sketching that building out, drawing elevations, sketching defects, and using grid paper on a clipboard. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Versus if you want to use LiDAR to scan a floor, floor by floor basis of internal waypoints, photographic reference points, annotating sketches of defects, and photographing, videoing and narrating, audio within your inspection. Nothing wrong with any of those things. I think the reality is you'll use a hybrid of all those things, especially when you get to play around with the systems. For templates, that's really important. I think one of the things I'd like to focus on is templates in general. If I say one thing, it's that, look, your template is your template. What Surventrix, for instance, can do is just build out your outputs. It's your work, it's your output. What we can do is streamline, standardize, bring you that efficiency and time saving within your data capture and your inspection processes. And those front end, let's call some of those processes maybe a little bit more mundane or time intensive. Those are where the efficiencies can come together. But when it comes to output, that's very much a personal thing. And I think it's not for any one product or person or system to tell you what to do or how to do it. If you look at again, I have to be politically correct as to how I say it. I've used lots of different templates. I'm an RCS registered user of the home survey suite, for instance, but there are flaws, particularly in the heritage context, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on. So it's about customization is the key message really for me, and reporting. So like I've said, we'll get into report writing and templates and modules like that. But I think it's just an overview, a flavour of some of the things we'd like to sort of just quickly touch on. I think before sort of go any further, I think, and some people may say, well, they don't go wrong, but one of the things that myself and Stephen have been involved in over the years for our sins is the expert witness side of things. And unfortunately, you do see things go wrong a little bit. And heritage surveys are probably at the highest end of that risk level when it comes to your PI and that complaints sort of side of the business, the dark side of surveying, let's call it. having been on the front lines and dealt with complaints for many, many years, the one thing I've learned, look, they do go wrong. So anything we can do to support a process, a compliance, a data capture, that sort of streamlining of a process where, I was always told, inspect property the same, do it however you want, inside out, top to bottom, start outside, do elevations, start in the roof. Make sure you're consistent. Do it always the right way. It's your way, so you do you, but try and keep a consistency to reduce the risk of it going wrong. But I think if we had a goal, it would be to say to you, look, this isn't us saying this is the way to do it, this is the right way, wrong way. This is us saying, look, what we're all trying to do today, the fact that you're on this call tells me that you all are on different journeys, maybe different sort of position in your roadmap on heritage surveys. Some will be doing them, some will be more expert in it than me. I'm not the go-to. Like I've said to you, I think Stephen is someone who I admire and respect, but from my perspective, I do acknowledge that we're all learning. I'm still learning in the job. I learn something new each day. It's just about building confidence. And I think if we had a goal, it would be to say to you, look, you all know, you all want to achieve the same things. It's about how we give you more confidence to do so. It's a framework. And I think that is what sums up best in terms of training. It's to provide you with the methodology, and Surventrix can help you give with the tools to ensure that your workflow is both technologically, but also from an ethics point of view. I think there's some key lessons that we can share with you. So just to set the scene, what is best? I mean, I'm referring to Stephen, I'm referring to best, and I haven't even introduced anyone to it really. But if you know Stephen Boniface, he needs no introduction. But for those that you don't know, obviously, unfortunately, can't be here today. He's a guest speaker with PCA at a dinner this evening. So I'm sort of representing us both. But me and Stephen known each other for a while. We got to know each other through conservation work with RCS. And yeah, Stephen and I, we've just worked together on a common theme of wanting to support members in the industry that perhaps want to delve a bit further into the heritage space. So how did that come about? Well, both Stephen and I, when we first met, we knew that there was a challenge there. And that challenge, quite frankly, was a frustration, really. I said to you before, my involvement with Surventrix can only have come about really through frustrations with software. I would never have got involved in software. I'm a surveyor. What do I know about software? But you can't have a system that says built by surveyors for surveyors without a surveyor involved in it. And the only reason I got involved in that, well, a few reasons, but the main one was through frustration of a system that could not take account of or be flexible enough to deal with traditional building surveying. It's too fixed, too rigid, too process driven. So we wanted something that was, flexible. You do you. It's not going to force you to use a system or a bit of hardware in a way you don't want to. I think all of these tools are just that. They're there to complement your job, not replace it. And again, we'll touch on AI a little bit later. But we felt, look, templates is a big thing for us, and we often talk about the home survey templates. I'm quite privileged to have worked with a lot of small independent firms up and down the country that work quite closely with to see what sort of templates they use from a report writing point of view. And there's a mix. You've got a camp probably split 50-50 between those that use the RCS products, and there's a camp of those that want to design and benchmark against the home survey standard, but particularly with heritage, want to design something more bespoke and flexible. And that's where that customization comes in. So we just felt, look, the templates are a problem. Standard paragraphs are a bit risky. Systems are a bit rigid. So what we really need is something that's more bespoke for heritage assets, because there's not really anything out there that thinks too much about that. We then started to think, well, actually, it's not just about templates. That's not the answer. You can give someone a template. It's what you do with it that counts. It's how you fill in those boxes. It's how you report. So when we thought about building templates, yes, we've done that. Yes, we have that in plan. We have some ideas around sharing some of those templates. In fact, there's sample ones to download within our heritage community system. But I think it goes way beyond that. I think it's not just about having a fixed template. It's your expertise. I think this relates to lots of different aspects of IT, but particularly around AI is the big one. Look, AI is a fantastic tool, and I've seen firms that are actively working out there, and there are models out there that are actually report writing at the moment, not just for straightforward stuff, but for heritage stuff. And that for me is very risky. It is your expertise that the client needs now more than ever. So we felt, look, it's no point us just giving someone a template unless we give them, the meat around the bones, which is, the sort of, I guess, the approach, the reasoning, the rationale, the guidance around using that template and that report writing. So I feel like, we just wanted to do something that complemented that. Why is it called Best? Look, this is not us saying that we are the best, and forgive me, because it might come across as a little bit arrogant, but it's not. It's a simple one. BE Conservation, Boniface Enterprises Conservation is Stephen. Surventrix, as it's evolved, for me, started out as a software platform, then turned into a business out of a box platform, which then evolved into well, look, there has to be a community around this, and things like Connect and these webinars and this training has to be something that is, a community-driven project. So Surventrix training was the idea for me. BEST equals best, and that's really in a nutshell why it's called Best. So it's just bringing that traditional, that knowledge, and blending in some of that IT infrastructure, really. So that's a little bit of a perhaps an albeit waffly introduction into myself, Stephen, Best, and the vision, as it were. I thought it'd be useful just to focus a little bit on some of the challenges out there. If you're looking on social media, as I often do, rightly or wrongly, at some of the public forums, particularly around heritage groups, surveyors have a bad rep right now, particularly RCS ones, for various reasons, rightly or wrongly. It's a shame, really, but a lot of it is misinformed. I think there are some genuine sort of cases where I've come across, and I do think that a lot of this could be avoided. And I think now is the time to really try and offer some support, offer some mentoring, offer something out there that can facilitate change. The home survey standard is going through some consultations and changes. The home buying and selling process is going to change whether we want it to or not. There are opportunities in that. We've seen today, for example, on the budget statement, mansion tax and things like that is going to have an impact on the heritage sector. And this is going to become more and more relevant to you and the skills that you offer. And as an industry, there is a real opportunity for you to specialise further in it if you don't already, to start to evolve your CPD and invest in yourself to get into that arena in a safe way, or to think about, look, you've been doing it for some time, just keeping up to date with everything. But why do things go wrong, or where do they go wrong? And just a couple of points on this. Some of the things that both Stephen and I have picked up on over the years, generic templates, we mentioned it before. I personally, and I'm quite happy to say it, I feel like the RICS home survey template for level 3 products is great, but is not fit for purpose for heritage properties, in my opinion. And there are a couple of reasons for that. And look, I'm a proud supporter of RICS. I'm not bashing anyone, but it's not customizable. And things like condition ratings, they are just not fit for purpose against a heritage asset, in my opinion. So the one thing I would say to people is to think about your output, think about your report delivery. It goes beyond just your consultation with your client. It goes beyond the debrief. It goes through, from a compliance point of view, what you put down in what format and how you visualize that to the client. Look, gone are the days of having to read War and Peace. Why are we putting lots of standard paragraphs in reports where actually there's a better way, there's a different way? So I think, from my point of view, I think it's generic templates. They do cause more harm than good, in this current day and age. This is particularly within the heritage space, obviously, I'm referring to. I think misunderstanding as well. I mean, this comes through from perhaps lack of knowledge, maybe. I think taking the time to upskill and to identify and assess the building that you're looking at. And this drills down into lots of different details. And those that do heritage surveys at the moment will fully understand this. But far too often when I look at it from the only hat I can wear to put this into context is complaints and expert witness. When you drill down into the reasons for those complaints, it's genuinely through well-intended but ill-informed advice. It's not that the surveyor was negligent in what they did when they went into the building. It's that they didn't really think through how they could have presented it to the client, and indeed, the way in which they did. And that's at a very basic level. And I'm not here to talk about lime mortars. What I'm saying here is it's understanding the difference between cement and lime. Lime, fine, you can all understand what lime is, but there's a whole day course we could do just on the physics of lime mortars. But I think we've seen a lot of that. So I think we just like trying to, I guess, do it in a positive, supportive, safe space to try and educate and support people as to, the basics in a way. This is just introducing some thought leading, really. And that links into poor phrases and weak narrative. I think, like I said to you before, use of condition ratings, a lot of these buildings are old. A lot of these buildings have stood the test of time. Many of them will have red and ambers all over them. It devalues what the client needs. It's quite a risky situation. I think, what's the impacts of that? I think these common themes can result in two critical things to think about. So what I'd suggest people need to be at least giving thought to is, from a compliance point of view, there are changes on the horizon in terms of RCS guidance notes that are in the pipeline. There's changes in the home survey standard, as we know. Templates are likely to be changed and updated, but I'd encourage you to think about that, because if you're not thinking about your output, there's a risk of compliance there. And obviously PI, that's the obvious one, just making sure that from a PI perspective, if you're stood in front of a judge explaining why you gave a condition rating of X, Y, or Z, you've got to be prepared to be able to, demonstrate your rationale and your thought process. Now, things like moisture and dealing with moisture in traditional buildings and the RCS joint practice statement, we will cover that off in due course. But there's lots of areas where I think as surveyors, we just want to be a bit more mindful of, and it is risky. So I think my message, if there is one, is just to say, look, from a heritage report perspective, it's about thought first, professional judgment, and clarity for your clients in terms of that narrative. It's not just the mechanical process of ticking boxes and standard templates. It's customization. It's a lot more considered. And of course, I'm stating the obvious with some of these things. So how do we tackle that? How do we approach, or how do we sort of deal with those within aspects like the training? So again, these are just some examples. The best training scheme itself, what we're trying to do here is to make it applicable on a sort of global level. It's not just UK specific. We're quite keen to benchmark what we're doing with ICOMOS so that this is, a wider sense applicable to, global frameworks. We're an IHBC registered training provider, and we're working quite closely with them for future developments of training. There's lots of things we have in plan with our training materials going forward. But I think the reason I wanted to mention these names is not from a sales pitch point of view. I'd say, look, for those of you that are perhaps coming at this from a very inquisitive mind, not having done a listed building survey before, or looked at sort of level 3s in general, maybe, these are the areas where you need to do a deep dive, spend your time, go down that rabbit hole. SPAB, English Heritage have some fantastic resources online, completely free. Just go away and swallow all that information. I think it's critical. But yeah, so a lot of what we're doing will be tailored towards that. The basics, look, this is, again, it might be stating the obvious, but it wouldn't be a heritage presentation without sort of at least touching on and referring to some of the key basics here. As I said to you before, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, even with me talking at 100 miles an hour, is not enough time to get into the real nitty gritty. I suppose this is setting the scene for what's to come next from a training perspective, but also maybe just to get you thinking about it. So, like I said, our approach is going to align with both UK guidance and international conservation doctrine. It's going to tackle things that Stephen refers to as the pillars of conservation, key matters such as breathability, thinking about that moisture management in a building. And this applies to all traditional buildings. Think about your building materials. Think about your vapor permeability, that plastic paint versus lime wash. It's understanding all of those matters, understanding the evolution of the building. One of the things that took me the longest thing to do, don't know whether it's just me, but was to date buildings and understand how to read a building, to truly read a building's evolution. Once you get to that point, I think you truly master the ability to inform your client as to the right advice for that right phase of the building. You can have modern additions versus Tudor aspects, and it's understanding how that building's evolved, really. And that's relevant in not just the report writing sense from a defect and a pathology point of view, but also from a legal standpoint, that compliance, that framework, those material changes, those listed building consent matters. It's making sure that what you are seeing follows through in a logical format for your, you're the eyes and ears of the client solicitor. You're there to handhold. It's understanding that significance and that compatibility of materials throughout the building fabric that become very important. I think template customization we mentioned before, some of the things I wanted to just put out there as placeholders, really, to say, look, think about these things, they're really important. listing grade, listing information, legal constraints. So I think one thing I'd encourage everyone to do, if you've not already done so, is to spend some time understanding more about those legal constraints around listing information. So one of the big emphases about listed building surveys, for instance, is what's changed in that building. I said to you before about reading buildings. If you can't read the building and you can't spot what's materially changed in that building, whether that is something as simple as, I give an example of external fixed lighting, for example, a modern security light fitting, or on the other extremities, a window's been replaced. These are all matters that if you miss them at your peril, because we all know what clients will thank you or not thank you for in the long run. And I think that listing information is pivotal, really, to getting your survey to a point where I spend an awful lot of time, or used to, in terms of the listing information and the material changes section. I do an awful lot of research on the English Heritage website, through websites like Sprift and Historic Maps, Google Street Scenes, really understanding what's changed in a building facade. You'd be amazed how many times you look at a building and say, is this even the right building that's listed, that's described by English Heritage? I've actually seen the wrong. The photographic reference points, there's shutters on windows, all of a sudden they've miraculously disappeared. These are all things that, you're there to capture for your client. So it's thinking about that listing information and that grading information, the type of grade listing. Is it locally listed? Is it statutory listed? What level of listing is it? Relating that back to the local conservation area plan, conservation officer. It's those sort of aspects that are real value adds for your clients. And those are the additional sort of service aspects, I guess, that go over and above your basic level 3 surveys. I mentioned it before, construction phases, understanding the building's timeline. How's that building evolved? What methods, what materials, these will all have an impact. Doing a listed building survey, for instance, is very often like, if I could describe it, as doing 3 building surveys in one sometimes. If you've got, I guess, let's call it a Georgian section, a Victorian section, a post-war section, these are all going to require different levels of reporting. So from that point of view, thinking about the evolution, reading buildings, there's some great content out there to delve further on that as well. Materials, that's the obvious one. Like I said, there's a key difference between lime pointing and cement pointing, plastic paints and lime washes, and the relationships on how moisture moves through a building. Module 2, and again, we'll come on to this, dealing with moisture. We could go off into that for days on end about moisture and materials. And in fact, we will. Significance and vulnerability. What's really critical? It's great to be able to identify what's changed in a building, i.e. material change. Your client will then thank you for that. And you can say, look, here's a list of all things that have been changed. Go away, get listed building consent confirmation. All too often, they'll come back and say, there's no records whatsoever. What do I do? There's lots of things to consider with those. You've got to be making sure that your clients are as invulnerable as possible to that legal liability, really, because obviously that will pass back to you. But I think beyond that, and perhaps more important than that, it's about the significance of the advice that you give. We can all identify moisture in a building. It's how significant it is. It's the causation. It's the remedial works. It's the timing. It's the costing. It's the implication. These are the additional follow-up advisories that go beyond a typical level 3 that we would explore as well. And as I said, those listed building consent triggers, material changes, that unauthorized work, I'd say that is a big, big focus. And, you get that bit right, you'd be amazed at how many solicitors will thank you for that, because, they never forget a good surveyor that is working for them and protecting their interest and able to help them do their job better for the clients too. So you get all of these basics right, you get to a point where through recommendation, through referral, your brand, your sort of social awareness builds with you. I think that's the thing. I just wanted to say there, look, going back to that point about templates, because everything we talk about reverts back to a template of some sorts, whether it's an inspection template or a report template. It should be a guide. It should lead your thoughts, but it's not there to limit you. And this is the flaw of a lot of templates I see. They're too limited. They're too robust. You have to have something that's more flexible. It's to lead your thought process, but it is not there to be rigid. You've got to elaborate further. Listed buildings need a lot more love, care, and attention. It's got to be sympathetic. So on the flip side of that, how can tech help? So the Surventrix sort of aspect, how does this sort of blend together? Look, tech is not just for surveyors doing level 2s or doing level 1s or doing mortgage valuations. tech can embrace and empower heritage surveyors. We've got some fantastic clients at Surventrix that do a lot of heritage work. I'm not going to name names. I've seen one of them on the call today. And they are, also experts in this field, and they're using Surventrix, and they are doing things in a way that is innovative and forward thinking. And from a time efficiency point of view, I'd encourage you to just play with the systems. I mean, I think one of the things that we wanted to do from the outset was, alongside the training, give people tools. And obviously anyone that signs up to the best training, for instance, gets a free access to Surventrix. You get a free pay-as-you-go account to that. It costs you nothing to have a play with it, to trial it, survey your own property, get a feel for what tech can do. You may hate it, you may love it, you may be somewhere in the middle. But the point there is it can help you. But it has to be bespoke by design. It's got to have you at the heart of it, and that's where you guide Surventrix. Surventrix doesn't guide you. It's your template. It's not a Surventrix template. Yes, they can help develop things. It's not a Rix template. It's a you template. So I think evolve, customize, and make it bespoke. Make it the best you can. That's the whole point of the home survey standards. Let's be honest. It's to benchmark against. It's not to lead you. RCS is not a product supplier. Yes, they are, but I don't think they want to be. They are standards. They're a regulator. So it's for us as an industry to innovate and do things better. LiDAR. There's a world where, why can't we do digital heritage surveys, interactive, three-dimensional interactive surveys with waypoints, with narration, with drones, thermography, all of that. It's there to add value and to help you do your job a bit more efficiently. Defensible data, that's there to help you. Systems, thinking about your systems, whether it's Surventrix or others. Think about those regulation, those member support visits, having all your ducks in a row. Software and technology can help you do so, but it doesn't have to be the only way. It's about having your process. I still like to sketch out plans on paper. Who knew? It's not the end of pen and paper. It shouldn't be, doesn't have to be, but it's got to be flexible. So again, the single ecosystem we talk about, whatever systems you're using, whether it's a report writing tool, a data storage system, a CRM system, I would encourage you to think, does it join up all the dots for you? Is it precise enough? Like I said, the best quote I've heard to date so far, and it was only yesterday, was, it's a single source of truth. That couldn't be any better if I was to sort of come up with that myself. It's got to be all in one place, all in one ecosystem, but it's not about a tick box culture. It's just, as I say, it's just there to help you. The other things to think about with heritage and tools and tech, they are all just that, tools. There's so many cool tools and innovation, and the pace of technology now. I wish we'd had this 20 odd years ago, because it's a fantastic time to be a surveyor. With drones becoming affordable, new versions of drones, I need to stop buying them because I'm getting told off with buying drones for the sake of buying drones, I think, these days. But they add such a dynamic to a heritage asset. It is unreal. So if you're not playing with drones or a camera pole, or working with someone that can do it for you as a consultant, I'd encourage you to explore it, because it adds so much value to your clients' reports, to you as an inspection process, to give you that bird's eye view. Stating obvious, but drones had to be on that list. LiDAR, I'm quite passionate about LiDAR. I don't think we've figured out all the kinks with how we use it, where we apply, and a product sense. When we truly master it, it will be when we have a product where surveyors can actually touchy-feely sell something. I think at the moment, to be able to walk through a building and create a 3D floor plan with LiDAR measurements, add photographic waypoints and narrated waypoints on a floor plan is a great start. And right now that can be done using Surventrix floor plan tool, but it goes beyond that. And what I want to see is a digital product. It's a 3-dimensional or a 4-dimensional walkthrough of a building, whether it's a heritage asset or not. Clearly, it won't work for everybody's budget, or it won't work for every property, but it has to be done. We have to be innovating in that way. Thermography is a side note. I've played around with thermography from a very basic level. I'm not Cat 1 or Cat 2 qualified. I've known surveyors that are very specialist in this area, but I'd encourage you, if you're working in the heritage sector, to specialise and to upskill in that, because it adds so much value in terms of a lot of the energy. We look at retrofit and energy efficiency context, but also moisture. Some of the high-end equipment can really add a lot of value in the same way drones can. AI is probably one of the biggest talking points at the moment. I know Surventrix are working a little bit on AI in the background. I've done a lot of playing with my own GBT models from a heritage context in terms of training models. It's a fantastically, scarily brilliant bit of kit, but it must be, I think caution is the one thing I will say with all of these things, but especially with AI. What I would say to you is, look, it is all about efficiency and speed of capture. But what I will say with AI is it's frighteningly good, but please don't let it replace you as a human being in terms of your thought process. I think there are too many people using AI without giving enough consideration to the accuracies of it, for instance. I mean, there's so many times where I've looked at it and thought, actually, that's not right. And I think, yeah. But anyway, without waffling into AI, I just think it's a key theme. It can add a lot of value, especially around heritage context. For instance, one of the things that I've used it quite heavily for of late is compliance, regulation, heritage asset guidance notes, technical bulletins. These aspects, at the touch of a search, it can give you the information you've been looking for. Gone are the days of spending hours trawling through a documentation, pulling a book off the shelf, or Googling something. The answer is at the fingertips. Clearly, you must sense check and consider whether that's the right answer, because funnily enough, AI does tell fibs sometimes. Don't ask me why or how, but rather than admit it's wrong, like you and I think sometimes tends to pretend it knows everything. It's a very dangerous tool in the wrong hands, but it's here to stay. The pace of innovation is frightening, and I do see a time where it's really going to complement what we do in the same way drones do. I mean, they weren't a thing when I qualified. Show my age there, but there we go. But yeah, it mustn't ever override your professional judgment. It's there to support you like every other tool. What good looks like, that sounds a bit presumptuous, but and look, I think this comes back to the pillars of what we were talking about before. Everything we talk about from a heritage conservation point of view comes back to those 5 pillars. So any given report, just think about these 5 pillars of quality, whether it's a heritage report or not. I think these are important measures, really. Clear reasoning. Always think about the why, the when, the how, and that sort of causation, and whatever advice you're giving, it's got to be clear, it's got to be reasoned, you've got that diagnostics, but it's making it in a plain, user-friendly language that your client's going to understand. But again, stating the obvious there, but it's one to put onto the list. A respect for the building fabric. I'm in the camp of sympathetic restoration, minimal intervention, and repair rather than replace, and all those lovely things. But I'm also a practical person in that, if that wall's been completely repointed in cement mortar, well, what are we going to do there? We're going to rake out the mortar beds and damage all the lovely old handmade bricks, or are we going to say, well, actually, it's about monitoring, it's about that respect for the fabric? And again, I'm probably teaching everyone to suck eggs with these sorts of statements, but it was just something of note on here to say. Consistency, I think, look, it's about having that professional, cohesive advice, doing the same methodology each and every property you go to. Yes, it's bespoke. Yes, the output is different. There's damp in all old buildings, but it'll never be the same level of damp, the same time of year, or the same elevation, or the same materials, or there's so many variables. But I think it's about a consistent approach that you can then adapt to the situation. At all costs, look, running a surveying practice, I know how hard it is to secure, and more importantly, to maintain a reasonable level of PI. So everything we do, have regard to your PI. Every bit of word that you put in your report, think, what would a judge say? What would a client ask me? What would a judge say? If I've recommended this, scrutinize yourself. So just think about what it is that you're saying in your context. Very often and this is the danger, I guess, with standard paragraphs, really. And as I said to you, why heritage surveys are bespoke, customized products, really. But it's just confidence. I think having the confidence in your own ability, your own advice, your own expertise carries so much weight for clients. They are so grateful. They rely on you. And to be honest, within the listed building industry, those that do surveys will know this, but you'd be amazed how many times you have to guide the solicitors too. You're there to not just represent your client, but to lead the solicitors sometimes. I think you are a key pivotal part of that process. So don't undervalue that, because you add so much value to the process. So just obviously just moving on to best training. So what's next? I think we've launched module 1 with the support of Surventrix. They very kindly support and sponsored the event. So we're now live with that. What it is, its most basic level, it's CPD. So for those that are experts in the field, Module 1 is live. It's an introduction into this subject matter. It's not geared just for surveyors. There's architects, planners, conservation officers. There's all sorts of people coming into this community. At its basic level, it's digital, it's online, it's accessible at a time and a pace for yourself. For me, we've put 10 hours of footage on there. I think personally there's closest to 15. What you actually get, and we'll pitch onto that in a second, is much more than that. But I think it's, at its heart, it's just building confidence. I think that's the obvious thing to say here. Look, you all know a lot of what we've talked about today, and forgive me if some of this comes across as a little bit obvious or samey or patronising. It's not meant to, because I appreciate a lot of you will know a lot of this already, but it's just building confidence. This is module 1. I'm not going to read all those off. It's all on the website, but what we've done with module 1 is just introduce the idea and the concept to people of what it is that we feel is an introduction into this space, as it were. So, for instance, several sections. Section 1 covers off lots of different things, but think of it as, I don't know, there's a bit of everything in there really, but the concept of minimal intervention, we talked about it before, right through to brick assessment and repair. It gets technical in places, but it's to give you an overview and a feel. And these are all watchable videos, downloadable materials, quizzes, CPD. It is formal CPD at the end of it. Section 2, prepping for the survey. All the obvious things there that you would do in advance of your pre-flight checks, your research, how you go about the inspection. Again, it may be obvious to some, it may not be to others. Section 3 is about data capture. We talked a little bit about different ways of doing so we've touched on that a little bit. We've also touched on the introduction of the joint statement position. More on that in a second, but that's an area where I think we really need to drill down and spend a lot of time on in due course, because it goes way beyond just heritage assets. It goes into everybody's day-to-day work, that one. Section 4, reflection, diagnosis. Again, an obvious one to say, but it's about that reflective thought. It's about considering the appropriateness of condition ratings, or whether in fact I don't believe there's a place for condition ratings in heritage assets. That's a bit contentious, hot potato to say it, but there I said it. I don't believe that they do. But if you're going to think about it, create your own. You don't have to stick to the RCS ones. Create your own matrix. Section 5 is creation of report. We're going to go into a lot more detail with all of these things, but we've given an introduction into example report templates, report writing, maintenance logs, ways in which we want to explore how you can do things in a slightly different way that will make your life a lot easier when you're compiling that very detailed report. We're covering off report writing. We're introducing things like Sprift. If you haven't checked it out, go away, look at it. Those that use it will know what I'm talking about, but it will save you a lot of time. It does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. I've got no interest in Sprift whatsoever, other than the fact that I'm a surveyor, having used it in the field, and I love it. Desktop research, pre-flight checks, bringing it all together in one place. I'm a big fan of doing things in one system rather than having multiple systems. And then just bringing that together with a bit of a post-report, your client debrief, your customer care, things that we've learned, things that we'd like to share, different sort of thoughts to put in there, and to just wrap that together. There's a lot of content in there, but we've tried to sort of give a flavour of where we can go with it. What else? Well, as part of that, not only have you got the CPD for year end, I mean, personally, I think there's at least 15 hours worth of formal CPD there in one hit. There's way more than that when you break it all down, but got to be realistic about it. There's helpful attachments, guides, download, practical case studies, all of that. What you actually get there, though, is access to a couple of things. So you get access to myself and Stephen signing up to the BE Conservation. That's a separate thing. It's a community where, think of this as a world where, wouldn't it be lovely to have a heritage community which is made up of planners, architects, contractors, surveyors, legal advisors that can all bounce off each other and support and help, and in a resource in a safe space. So you get a year's membership to that, which is Stephen's community. You also get access to Surventrix, which is a free account, which is typically, I think, about £100, for a sign-up fee, just to give you access to something that we're going to delve into. We talk about report writing. There's lots of things you can use Surventrix for. I'm not here to sort of pitch and to give a hard sell about it, but at its very basic level, some of the things that Stephen and I are talking about, particularly around templates, report writing, and phrase libraries, will be delivered through Surventrix as a supportive provider. So you'll have access to that. So that's all of module 1. My shameless plug, we have got a Black Friday offer on at the moment, just as a discount. I was told to say that, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but yeah, it's there. We do have a promotion on it at the moment. What would we like to do? Because we've just literally gone live. It's took us best part of a year to put it all together, to do it right, to try and put our heart and soul into it. But it is just a start. What we really want to do with this is what comes next. Module 1 is great, but it's what we do in modules 2, 3, 4 and beyond, in perpetuity, let's call it. There are some really good things that we can pull together. I think these are just a couple that we're toying with of what comes next. Personally, I think number 2 is going to be the hot potato, but it's the most important one in the room. It's the one that surveyors often get wrong. I'll be honest, I can say that because I'm one, but it's an easy one for us to pick off because it's not that complicated. I know there's variables. I know there's a lot to consider, but we have some real value to add in that space. So I think that's where we'll probably go next. We're also going to do more on technological stuff, but that's probably, an easier one to pick off. But I think where the value is going to come is things like report writing sessions and narrative and reasoning. There's lots of other things that we'd like to do in person. We've put a lot of planning into, next year. It's not just about building content. What we are trying to do here is to build a conservation movement. That sounds corny and cheesy when I say it out loud, but it is true. It's what we've tried to do with Connect. It is a community. It's about more than just technology and hardware and technical advisories. It's about people. So we're trying to bring that together. So we will be doing more on heritage report writing, on templates, lots more case study, of real surveys that myself and Stephen have been involved in over the years. We're looking at doing some regional in-person events. We've had chats with and got agreement with Avon-Croft Museum, for example. There's lots we can do with this if people are interested. People might not be, but the opportunity will be there if those that are. We have aligned with IHBC. We are now a CPD accredited trainer. Stephen has been for some time, but Best are now associated as well. But we are exploring a formal pathway with them. There's some changes on the horizon, some exciting stuff. They're looking to make some changes, but we're working quite closely with them. We're also looking to link in ECOMAS, should I say, just to bring in another level of, I guess, from a compliance point of view, if nothing else, because if something goes wrong or if you're judged or critiqued, these things will come into play, these standards. So we are tailoring benchmarking towards those. And just to give people a cross-discipline collaboration, as I said to you before, it's not just surveyors, there's engineers, architects, planners, there's all sorts of areas where we can bring together. Yeah, and again, we just touched on that there, but I think, the workflow without ethics is a real risk. So what this is today, what you're all here spending, a rather cold, gloomy evening trying to do, we all want to do the same thing, so just thinking about that, and I think Best Training and Surventrix can help with that. I'm going to stop talking now because I've waffled on for a very long time. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you're still awake.